Number 21. The intellectual standards of logic and fairness. Capers are double in science fiction. The 8th and 9th standards, logic and fairness. The 8th standard is that of logic, or logicalness, to be parallel in construction with the others. To be logical is to be coherent, that the ideas presented are related to one another, that they flow rationally from one to the other, that the inferences follow, that nothing is self-contradictory. The standard of logic does not mean unfeeling. This is a misunderstanding of what it means to think. Thinking gives rise to feeling. Feeling is the biological reaction to what is thought. Thinking yourself under stress, you react stressfully. If you're thinking about being reasonable, you react reasonably. It's the thinking that gives rise to the emotion. I point this out because manipulators will claim that your calm, considered, thoughtful approach is unfeeling. This ad hominem simply isn't true. It's just a different kind of feeling. Objective reasoning brings with it a calm, deep, thorough consideration. The feeling that comes from attempting to utilize reason to the best of your ability assists in that process. Strong emotion can hijack good reasoning. It makes us rush to judgment. Critical thinkers don't rush. They carefully consider. Manipulators know that the longer you think, the worse off they are. So they will try to bully you into being rash. The 9th intellectual standard is fairness. This last of the standards is certainly not the least. In fact, it may be the most important of all. But how can fairness be an intellectual standard? Well, fairness in this context means undistorted, true to the original point, honestly considered. It is perhaps the most important because for critical thinking to be truly critical in the objective sense, it must be fair. Fairness should be a quality of all the others. You cannot be truly fair without utilizing all of the universal standards in the first place. And if any of these standards are unfairly applied, then it follows that the reasoning must be distorted in some way. Fairness is the standard that makes reasoning itself reasonable. It makes critical thinking in what Dr. Richard Paul calls the strong sense. Only through fairness is our thinking honest, just, and moral. For Dr. Richard Paul and Linda Elder, critical thinking without this strong sense of fair-mindedness is not truly reasonable. Throughout, we have seen that all the standards may be perverted, changed, misused, or distorted in some way. This isn't really critical thinking at all. It is a misuse of reason. It's not reasonable to purposely make things muddy or inaccurate or imprecise or irrelevant or insignificant or trivial or narrow or irrational. In a word, it is unfair. All sophistic reasoning has at its core something distorted, something not completely considered, something dishonest. In other words, all sophistic reasoning is unfair in some way. I often say that all sophistry is based upon some distortion. Distortion equals unfairness. To achieve fairness, you seek to fairly represent, not to distort the original, to represent it as it was represented to you. The universal standards are absolutely necessary when it comes to reasoning well. They are criteria applied when you want to ensure that your thinking is done properly. It is the make it better part of the definition. That definition is that critical thinking is thinking about your thinking to make it better and adopting traits that make it possible. In the next presentation, the 22nd out of 34, we will transition to the intellectual traits, also known as the intellectual virtues.